So I did, my name is Dr. Blaisure, and I did my study on OMOP, which is an organization that developed a common data model. And the common data model's purpose was to incorporate research data into a database that could be used on commodity hardware and other SQL technologies. Fortunately for this, we're going to have to just pause the concept fine for a little bit because this database has a lot. Use the word concept quite a bit. So OMOP's goal was dedicated to appropriate use of observational healthcare databases. The output of the partnership was an interoperable common data model at the time, version 4, and then that concluded July 2013, where the observational health data sciences and informatics group picked up the data model and released version 5. The Observation Medical Outcomes Partnership, that's what OMOP stands for, I'm sorry, I couldn't tell you that. And then going forward with that, we will be looking at the version 5 model. The technology, the model was built to be technology agnostic. The SQL databases can be downloaded and installed in many different kinds of systems. They're all open source software. It can be downloaded on GitHub. So that's what I did is I took a SQL Server instance, I downloaded the GitHub script to install the database, and then I was able to create models based on that information. Now, we also have what's called a vocabulary system, and that's a grouping of concepts or terminology systems such as SNOMED, ICD-9, ICD-10. And what happens is it takes those contextual fields to tag data in the database. And then later on you can query the database to figure out what different data entities correspond to those concepts. So I took some assumptions. Being a database administrator in a past life, I just want you to be aware of these liberties I'm taking. A table represents something, and a row represents some instance of that thing. A primary foreign key relationship represents something being said about those things, or some things. And the type of relationship, a one-to-one, or one-to-many, or many-to-many relationship, says something about the cardinality of those relationships of things. This is an entity relational diagram of the data model. Specifically version 5, this is taken directly from the documentation. It shows how it shows tables that are related, but not necessarily how they're related. The blue box represents the clinical data that we'll be taking a brief look at today. The red box contains information about infrastructure and resources of a healthcare system. The green and purple boxes denote pre-calculated things that help analytical software run faster. The orange and light blue boxes contain information about the terminologies that are being used, the concepts that the data entities are being tagged with. So this is a person table, the structure of the actual table in the database. The gold key represents a primary key, which is a unique identifier for a row in that table. The gray key represents a foreign key relationship to another table. The little kind of window with 3 lines in it represents some kind of data entity, whether it be a text character field or a number or something similar to that. The information beside them denotes whether it could be null or not null. In this case, person ID, gender concept, and year of birth all cannot be null. They have to be provided in the database or it will not let you put this row in. And also race concept and ethnicity concept are not null. So the definition presented in the documentation is a person is a domain contains records that uniquely identify each patient in the source data, where other clinical information tables are linked directly back to that person. So I want to look at some of the columns. A gender concept column. Now, gender is kind of a tough thing to define, especially without further context. Are we talking about genotypical gender, phenotypical gender? Or are we talking about some kind of gender role? I could see examples of all three of these things, and not knowing what the original information was, it's hard to say what we're defining here. So I've defined it as an information content entity, and it's the output of some kind of healthcare information gathering process where a person is an agent in. So there's a column for race concept. I had a lot of problems trying to define race. I looked at the U.S. Census Bureau for help, and this is the definition they gave. They say that it's not anything to do with biology, origin, or genetics. And it generally reflects a social definition. I really have no idea what that means. And they go on to say, people who identify their origin as Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish may not be of any race. As you can see, a ridiculous definition. So without further talking about race, I can see it being origin of ancestry. I could see it being maybe genetic sequences that are common in a population, qualities that are common in a population. But from what I can tell, and this model is based around government collection of race and ethnicity, it's really just an information content entity that says something about the person, which I can't really define. And it's a similar role with ethnicity. I found a little bit better definition. The definition of ethnicity is the culture of people in a given geographic region. Okay, so I defined cultural acts. So there's a bunch of these cultural acts going on, and an ethnic role is realized in those cultural acts, and the field is an information content entity about that instance of ethnicity, which also is supported by the people in those roles, which also occurs in a spatial region. Birth date column. Again, another information content entity. It's about the temporal region of an act of birth that has an output of a person. That birth date references part of that temporal region, depending on where the birthing process starts and ends. The location column, a little bit of an ambiguous name. In the documentation, it's referencing the address of residency only. So this wouldn't be any kind of work address or anything like that. It would only be address of residency. It's also an information content entity. There's all these acts of residency happening in this spatial region, and the location of that spatial region is referenced by this field. The provider column, this field references the person bearing the primary care physician role. So what we're looking at here is a primary care physician is an agent in acts of primary care. Those acts of primary care realize the PCP role, which is in this case, person number 2 is bearing that role, and person number 1 is bearing a patient role. The care site column, again, a little ambiguous for the name, but it's referring to the primary care's physician's office. It would be an address that is an information content entity about that care site, which is a spatial region where acts of primary care happen. So that's really the person table. I just want to talk about a few things I noticed just from a database point of view. The location column is a one-to-one relationship. So that means any time someone changes residency, that information would disappear completely. The previous information would disappear completely. Not acceptable in research.
Yeah, like just environmental exposure research would be impossible because we want to know where that patient has been, what they've been exposed to. Gender, really not defined in a way that we could get use out of it. Some of the electronic medical record systems are acknowledging that now. They're putting fields like, realized sex, genotype sex, and then transitions and things like that, so they can define gender a little better. Again, provider and care site, that's a one-to-one relationship. So anytime a provider, if you change your primary care provider, all that information would be lost. It would just disappear. So it would only be the most current one. So you couldn't go back and do historical. It's just to see who's cared for you over the years. Another unacceptable thing in research. There's a person table and there's a provider table. I find that a little strange. Potentially you could have a person with a patient role having a different ID than a person with a provider role. So you could have a duplication issue. I think it would have been better to split this off into a person table and persons, and maybe a person provider table and a person patient table. Split it off into roles. That would make more sense to me, because isn't a provider a person? And then, I talked about you can have duplicate keys. Duplicate people with separate keys. This is a visit occurrence table. I actually was kind of excited when I initially looked at this table. It's where most of the database is patient-centric. You have the visit occurrence table where you have conditions, observations, and all these other things under it. So it's really integral to this data model. So as you can see, you can already see a problem with it. It says the definition is one or more providers, and it has a one provider ID. It's a one-to-one relationship. So you're not able to define multiple providers in a visit. So a row in this table represents an instance of a healthcare process, which we would call it a healthcare process. It defines a temporal region based on the visit start date, time, and end date, time. It also has a visit concept ID, which is a concept which is meant to capture what kind of facility it is. Well, not really facility. What kind of stay it is, I guess I would say. So you have 4 choices, which are inpatient, outpatient, emergency, and long-term. So again, not a great way to classify it. The visit type is also a concept ID, and it's about the type of facility that the patient is going to. So. And we can kind of look at this a little bit. So I said, person is related to every one of the clinical tables. The visit occurrence has all these tables that relate to it. So procedures, drugs, devices, conditions, measurements, notes, and observations are all directly linked to this table. I just want to note there's important to be a difference between temporal regions of bodily processes and the temporal regions of healthcare gathering. Almost done. Condition occurrence. This is really where it starts to fall apart. This table can contain diagnoses, signs, symptoms, and out of system conditions, which I have no idea what that means. So this table could literally, or outputs of processes, healthcare processes that could be any of these things, and that is really, really tough to work with. Then again, they have an observation table where the previous table was observations, diagnoses, and all of these outputs of processes. They have a separate observation table that is designed to capture other, for lack of a better word. So some conclusions. I don't think it's possible to map this to BFO. I think it has SQL, it has relational problems built into it that I found just from a database point of view. I think the information is organized in a way that is just not compatible with BFO. A lot of those tables will have to be split out and built differently. Conditions and observations, I think are completely incompatible. I don't think they need to be in the same table, or should be. And there's some cardinality issues that I've definitely seen in the database, and some of these table names are absolutely misleading. Let me show it a little bit.
Very good. Okay.
I think at slide 10, it seems like you defined ethnicity by using ethnicity. It's a person who has ethnicity role in a cultural act. Is that right? That
So
seems
yeah,
like
what I'm
a
saying
problem.
here is the ethnicity one here is I should have done this a little differently so it's more apparent. But this is the data column. Okay, so this would be 0152, right? Okay, so that's just an ID that is in the table. So I'm just saying it's referencing this ethnicity role.
Okay.
So I'm saying this is a symbol that references this role that is realized in some cultural acts.
I see. Okay.
So do you not have a problem here that anyone who does Irish dancing becomes thereby of ethnicity Irish?
I have a lot of problems with race and ethnicity. I think it's probably going to be, it is not well defined. That was one of the meaningful use things is that ethnicity, we have certain fields we want. Hispanic is an ethnicity, okay? But as the definition from the government is that Hispanic does not require a race.
Isn't there something missing on that slide? As well on many others?
I didn't put everything. So what are you referring to exactly?
Who knows what I'm referring to?
The number?
Excuse me?
The number? The slide number?
No. I mean, the temporal indexing.
Yeah, right.
Almost
At
as
time,
important.
Yes.
You can also see the problems you're having with not using contrasting colors. You look at the lines connecting the boxes. They're not, to me anyway.
Yeah, it does on the screen. It does.
So always use really strong